The restaurant was the kind of place where rich people came to feel important. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths covered every table. Waiters moved quietly, like shadows, making sure every glass stayed full and every plate arrived hot. It was the kind of place where a single dinner could cost more than what most people earned in a week. And right in the middle of all this elegance, there was a woman named was 43 years old. She had worked at this restaurant for almost 8 years. 8 years of carrying heavy trays. 8 years of smiling at strangers who barely looked at her face. 8 years of saying, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, ma'am," to people who never bothered to learn her name. To the guests, she was invisible. Just another waitress in a black uniform. Just another pair of hands delivering their expensive steaks and fancy wine. They never wondered where she came from. They never asked about her life. To them, she was nobody. But had not always been nobody. 20 years ago, in a small city in Portugal, a young girl sat at a piano for the first time. She was only 6 years old, and her fingers were so small they could barely reach the keys. But the moment she pressed down and heard that first note ring out, something magical happened. She fell in love. That little girl was. Her family was poor. Her father worked at a factory and her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. They lived in a tiny apartment with thin walls and a leaky roof. But somehow, her mother saved enough money to pay for piano lessons. She believed her daughter had a gift, and she was right. Learned fast, faster than anyone expected. By the time she was 10, she was playing pieces that most teenagers struggled with. By 15, she had won 3 national competitions. Teachers said she had something special, not just skill but soul. When played, people felt something deep in their hearts. They cried. They smiled. They forgot their problems for a few precious minutes. At 18, earned a scholarship to one of the best music schools in the country. It was a dream come true. She moved to the big city, practiced for hours every day, and imagined her future. Concert halls filled with thousands of people, standing ovations, her name on posters, her music touching lives all over the world. Everything was falling into place. Everything was perfect. And then life happened. Was 22 when she got the phone call. Her mother was sick, very sick. The doctors said it was cancer and it had already spread. Treatment was expensive, more expensive than her family could ever afford. Her father had lost his job at the factory. There was no money, no savings, no hope. Made a decision that would change her life forever. She dropped out of music school. She gave up her scholarship, her dreams, her future. She took a job, then another, then another. She worked day and night to pay for her mother's treatment. She sent every penny she earned back home. For 3 years she fought. She fought to keep her mother alive. She fought to keep her family together. She fought until there was nothing left to fight for. Her mother passed away on a rainy Tuesday in November, was 25 years old. She had no degree, no career, no money, and now no mother. The woman who had believed in her more than anyone else in the world was gone. Felt broken. She could not go back to Portugal. There were too many memories there, too much pain. So she did what millions of desperate people have done throughout history. She left everything behind and moved to America, hoping to start over. But starting over is never as easy as it sounds. Arrived in the country with $200 in her pocket and a heart full of grief. She did not speak English well. She did not know anyone. She took whatever work she could find. Cleaning jobs that left her exhausted and empty. Eventually, she found work at the Grand Meridian Hotel restaurant. It was a step up from washing dishes. The pay was better. The tips were decent, and so stayed. 1 year turned into 2. 2 turned into 5. 5 turned into 8. Somewhere along the way, she stopped dreaming. The piano became a distant memory. She told herself it was better this way, easier. Dreaming only led to disappointment. Hopping only led to heartbreak. It was safer to expect nothing. It was safer to be invisible. But there was one problem, one painful, constant reminder that would not let her forget. In the corner of the restaurant, right next to the large windows overlooking the city, there was a grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shiny, with ivory keys that seemed to glow under the soft lights. Sometimes the hotel hired musicians to play during dinner service. Soft jazz, classical pieces, background music for rich people eating their expensive food. Every time walked past that piano, something inside her ached. It was a deep, heavy feeling in her chest, like grief, like longing, like looking at a photograph of someone you loved and lost. She never touched it. She never even got close. She would just glance at it as she hurried by, carrying plates of food that cost more than she made in a day. And then she would look away, pushing down the feelings that threatened to rise up. Some of the other staff members had worked at the restaurant almost as long as. They knew her as the quiet one, the one who always showed up on time, the one who never complained, never called in sick, never caused any trouble. They liked her, but nobody really knew her. Kept to herself. She had learned that it was easier that way. Making friends meant opening up. Opening up meant talking about the past. And talking about the past meant remembering everything she had lost. So she worked. She smiled her polite smile. She said her polite words. And at the end of every shift, she went home to her small apartment, ate a simple dinner, and went to sleep. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Sometimes, late at night when she could not sleep, would lie in bed and think about the life she could have had. The concerts, the applause, the music. She would imagine herself on a stage, playing for thousands of people, feeling that incredible rush of joy and connection that only music could bring. But then morning would come, and she would push those thoughts away. That life belonged to someone else now, a younger version of herself who no longer existed, a girl who had been foolish enough to believe that dreams could come true. Was not that girl anymore. She was just a waitress, just a pair of tired hands and aching feet, just another invisible woman in a world that did not see her. At least that is what she believed. But life has a funny way of surprising us. Sometimes the universe has bigger plans than we can imagine. Sometimes the things we bury deepest inside us are the very things that are meant to rise up and change everything. Did not know it yet, but her story was far from over. In fact, the most important chapter of her life had not even begun. And it all started on an ordinary Tuesday evening, when a rude customer at table 12 said something that would break her heart and wake up her soul at the very same time. It was a Tuesday evening, and the restaurant was busier than usual. Every table was full. Waiters rushed back and forth like bees in a hive. The kitchen was loud with the sound of sizzling pans and shouting chefs. Had already been on her feet for 6 hours, and her back was starting to ache in that familiar way it always did during long shifts. She did not mind the busy nights. In fact, she preferred them. When she was busy, she did not have time to think. She did not have time to feel. She just moved from one table to the next, taking orders, delivering food, clearing plates. It was almost like meditation. Empty your mind, focus on the task, repeat. That night was assigned to the back section of the restaurant. Most of the tables there were occupied by regular guests, business people having meetings, couples celebrating anniversaries, a few tourists taking pictures of their food. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. And then there was table 12. Table 12 was a large round table near the window. It was usually reserved for important guests, politicians, celebrities, wealthy businessmen who like to show off. Tonight, it was occupied by a group of 5 men in expensive suits. They were loud. They laughed too hard at their own jokes. They ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and made a big show of swirling it around in their glasses. Had seen men like this before, many times. They were not bad people necessarily. They were just used to getting whatever they wanted. They lived in a world where money solved every problem and opened every door, a world very different from hers. She approached the table with her usual polite smile. She took their orders carefully, writing everything down in her small notepad. One of the men, the one sitting at the head of the table, barely looked at her when he spoke. He just rattled off his order while scrolling through his phone. He wanted a steak, medium rare, very specific. He made her repeat it twice to make sure she understood. Nodded and walked away. She gave the order to the kitchen. She continued serving her other tables. 20 minutes later, the food was ready. She loaded up her tray and carried it to table 12. She served each man his plate, saving the steak for last. She placed it in front of the man at the head of the table and stepped back. He cut into the meat, he looked at it, and then his face changed. "This is not medium rare," he said. His voice was loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "This is medium. I specifically said medium rare. Can you not understand simple English?" Felt her stomach tighten. She looked at the steak. It looked perfectly pink in the middle, but she had been doing this job long enough to know that arguing with a guest was pointless. The customer was always right, even when they were wrong. "I am so sorry, sir," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I will have the kitchen prepare a new one for you right away." She reached for the plate, but the man held up his hand to stop her. "Wait," he said. He was looking at her now, really looking at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her uncomfortable, something cold. "How long have you worked here?" Hesitated. 8 years, sir." He laughed. It was not a kind laugh. 8 years and you still cannot get a simple steak order right. He shook his head and looked at his friends. This is the problem with these people. No ambition, no drive. They are happy to just coast through life doing the bare minimum. His friends chuckled nervously. One of them looked embarrassed, but the man kept going. "Let me give you some advice," he said, leaning back in his chair. "People like you will never amount to anything. You know why? Because you do not have what it takes. You are just a waitress. That is all you will ever be, a waitress." The words hit like a slap across the face. She stood there frozen. She could feel the eyes of other guests watching her. She could hear the silence spreading across the nearby tables. Her cheeks burned with shame. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Say something," a voice inside her screamed. "Defend yourself. Tell him he is wrong. Tell him he does not know anything about you." But she did not say anything. She could not. Her throat was closed. Her mind was blank. All those years of staying quiet, of being invisible, of swallowing her pride had trained her too well. "I will get your steak," she whispered, and then she turned and walked away. She made it to the kitchen before the tears came. She stood in the back corner next to the storage room and cried silently. Her shoulders shook. Her chest hurt, but she did not make a sound. She had learned how to cry without making noise a long time ago. A young waiter saw her and asked if she was okay. She wiped her eyes and nodded. "I am fine," she said, "just tired." She finished her shift. She served the man his new steak. She smiled and said, "Enjoy your meal," like nothing had happened. She collected her tips at the end of the night. She said goodbye to her. And then, when everyone else had left, stayed behind. The restaurant was empty now. The chandeliers had been dimmed. The chairs were stacked on the tables. The only light came from the outside, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Stood in the middle of the room, alone with her thoughts. The man's words echoed in her head. "Just a waitress. That is all you will ever be." Was he right? Was this really all she was meant to be? A nobody. An invisible woman serving food to people who would never know her name. She thought about her mother. Her sweet, brave mother who had worked so hard to give her a chance at a better life. Her mother who had believed in her talent. Her mother who had sacrificed everything so could follow her dreams. What would her mother think if she could see her now? The thought made her heart ache in a way she had not allowed herself to feel in years. She had buried so many emotions, so much pain, so much regret. She had locked it all away in a box deep inside her chest and thrown away the key. But tonight something was different. Tonight the box was opening. Turned her head and looked at the piano. It sat there in the corner, silent and waiting. The same piano she had walked past thousands of times. The same piano she had forced herself to ignore for 8 long years. Her feet started moving before her mind could stop them. She walked across the empty restaurant, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She stopped in front of the piano and stared at it. Her reflection looked back at her in the polished black surface. She looked tired, old, worn down by life. But her hands remembered. Slowly pulled out the bench and sat down. The leather was cool against her legs. The keys stretched out before her like an old friend she had abandoned long ago. She lifted her hands. They were trembling. These hands had not touched a piano in over 12 years. They had carried trays. They had scrubbed dishes. They had done 1,000 small tasks that meant nothing, but they had not made music, not once. Placed her fingers on the keys. The ivory felt smooth and familiar, and in that moment all the years of silence fell away. She pressed down. A single note rang out in the empty restaurant, pure, clear, beautiful. And began to cry again, but this time the tears were different. This time they were not tears of shame or sadness. They were tears of remembering who she used to be. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes and began to play. That first night played for almost 2 hours. She did not even realize how much time had passed. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. All those years of silence, all those buried emotions, all those forgotten dreams came rushing back through her fingers. She played pieces she had learned as a child, simple melodies that her first teacher had taught her. She played the competition pieces that had won her trophies and scholarships. She played the complicated works of Chopin and that she had spent years perfecting. Some parts she remembered perfectly. Other parts were rusty and full of mistakes, but it did not matter. For the first time in 12 years, felt alive. When she finally stopped, her fingers were sore and her cheeks were wet with tears. She looked around the empty restaurant, half expecting someone to be watching her. But she was alone, just her and the piano and the ghosts of her past. She closed the lid gently, pushed in the bench, and walked out into the cold night air. Her heart was beating fast. Her mind was spinning. She felt like a completely different person than the woman who had started her shift that evening. That night could not sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every note in her head. Her fingers twitched against the blanket, practicing invisible keys. She thought about her mother. She thought about the music school. She thought about the girl she used to be. And she made a decision. The next night after her shift ended and everyone went home, stayed behind again. She told herself it would just be for a few minutes, just 1 or 2 songs. But 1 song turned into 5. 5 turned into 10. Before she knew it, 2 more hours had passed. This became her secret routine. Every night after the restaurant closed, would wait until she was alone. Then she would walk to the piano, sit down, and play. Sometimes she practiced scales and exercises to strengthen her fingers. Sometimes she worked on difficult passages that she could not quite get right. Sometimes she just played whatever came to her heart. The music was coming back to her faster than she expected. Muscle memory, she realized, was a powerful thing. Her hands remembered patterns and movements that her mind had forgotten. It was like reuniting with an old friend. Awkward at first, but then familiar and comfortable. Of course, keeping a secret like this was not easy. Had to be careful. She always made sure everyone had left before she started playing. She kept the volume soft so no one passing by outside would hear. She watched the clock and made sure to leave before the morning cleaning crew arrived. For 3 weeks her plan worked perfectly. No one suspected a thing. Went about her days like normal, serving food, smiling politely, being invisible. But inside, everything had changed. She had a purpose now, a reason to get through each shift, a light waiting for her at the end of every tunnel. And then one night she got caught. It was a Thursday around midnight. Was deep into a piece by. It was a difficult piece, full of big chords and fast runs. She was concentrating so hard that she did not hear the footsteps approaching. "That is beautiful." Jumped so hard she nearly fell off the bench. She spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing a few feet away was the night security guard. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes. Had seen him many times over the years, but they had never really spoken. He usually just nodded at her when she left and went back to his crossword puzzles. "I am so sorry," said quickly, standing up. "I know I should not be here. I will leave right now. Please do not tell anyone. I cannot lose this job. The old man held up his hand gently. "Slow down," he said. "I am not going to tell anyone." Stared at him confused. "You are not." He shook his head. "I have been listening to you play for the past 2 weeks. Every night. I sit in the hallway and just listen." He smiled softly. "It is the most beautiful thing I have heard in a very long time." Did not know what to say. She felt her eyes filling with tears again. This seemed to be happening a lot lately. The old man walked closer and sat down on a nearby chair. "My wife used to play piano," he said quietly. "She passed away 3 years ago. When I hear you play, it reminds me of her. It feels like she is still here somehow." Sat back down on the bench. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, understanding. "I used to be a pianist," finally said. "A long time ago, before life got in the way." The old man nodded. "Life has a way of doing that," he said, "but it seems like you found your way back." From that night on, the security guard became secret audience. Every night he would sit in his chair in the corner and listen while she played. Sometimes he would close his eyes and smile. Sometimes a tear would roll down his cheek. He never clapped or said much. He did not need to. His presence was enough. Having someone listen made play even better. She started practicing with more purpose. She wanted to do justice to the music. She wanted to honor the gift her mother had seen in her all those years ago. She wanted to prove, at least to herself, that she was more than just a waitress. Weeks passed. Playing improved dramatically. The rust was gone. The hesitation was gone. Her fingers flew across the keys with confidence and grace. She was not just remembering how to play. She was becoming the pianist she had always been meant to be. And then one evening, everything changed again. Was setting up tables before the dinner service when the restaurant manager called a staff meeting. Everyone gathered near the bar, wondering what was going on. The manager looked excited, which was unusual. He was normally a very serious man. "I have big news," he announced. "The hotel has been chosen to host the annual Children's Music Foundation Charity Gala. It is happening in 2 weeks, 300 guests, very important people. This is a huge honor for us." The staff murmured with excitement. Charity galas meant big tips and important connections. Everyone was already thinking about the extra money they would make. The manager continued. "There is just one problem. The famous pianist who was supposed to perform has canceled. Some kind of family emergency. We have been trying to find a replacement, but no one is available on such short notice." Felt her heart skip a beat. She glanced across the room at the security guard, who had come in to listen to the announcement. He was already looking at her. "So for now," the manager said with a sigh, "we will have to do without live music. It is disappointing, but we will make it work." The meeting ended. Everyone went back to their tasks, picked up a stack of napkins and started folding them, her mind racing. A charity gala, 300 guests, no pianist. The security guard walked over to her slowly. He did not say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at her with those kind eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes life gives us a second chance. The question is whether we are brave enough to take it." Shook her head. "I cannot," she whispered. "I am not ready. I have not performed in front of people in over 20 years. I would fall apart." The old man smiled gently. "That is fear talking," he said, "and fear is a liar. I have heard you play. You are ready. You have been ready for a long time. You just do not believe it yet." He patted her shoulder softly and walked away, leaving alone with her thoughts and her fears, and a decision that could change everything. The 2 weeks before the gala passed quickly, too quickly. Threw herself into her work, trying not to think about the opportunity she was letting slip away. She told herself it was the right decision. She was not ready. She was too old, too out of practice, too scared. But every night she still played. She played longer and harder than ever before. She practiced until her fingers ached and her back was stiff. She worked on the most difficult pieces in her memory, pushing herself to be better. It was almost like she was preparing for something, even though she kept telling herself she was not. The security guard never brought up the gala again. He just sat in his usual spot and listened, but sometimes would catch him looking at her with a certain expression. It was not disappointment exactly. It was more like patience, like he was waiting for her to figure something out on her own. The night of the gala arrived on a cold Saturday in November. Had never seen the restaurant look so beautiful. Thousands of tiny lights hung from the ceiling like stars. Flowers covered every table. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the main ballroom. Everything sparkled and glowed. The guests started arriving around 7 o'clock. They came in expensive cars and designer clothes, women in long gowns and diamond jewelry, men in tailored suits and polished shoes. Watched them from the side of the room, feeling like she was looking into another world. 300 people filled the ballroom: business leaders, politicians, celebrities, music critics, wealthy donors who supported children's music education. These were the kind of people who could change lives with a single phone call, the kind of people had once dreamed of performing for. But tonight she was not a performer, she was just a waitress. Moved through the crowd with her tray of champagne glasses. She smiled and nodded. She said, "Excuse me and thank you." She was invisible just like always, just like she had trained herself to be. The dinner service went smoothly. Course after course was served without any problems. The guests laughed and talked and clinked their glasses. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. Then came the moment had been dreading. The host of the evening, a tall woman with silver hair and a kind face, stepped up to the microphone. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about the Children's Music Foundation and all the good work they did. She spoke about how music could change lives, especially for young people who had no other opportunities. Felt those words hit her heart. She knew exactly what music could do. She knew how it could lift you up and give you hope. She knew because music had once saved her. The host paused and looked down at her notes. Her smile faded slightly. "I must apologize for one thing," she said. "As many of you know, we had arranged for a wonderful pianist to perform for us tonight. Unfortunately, he had a family emergency and could not be here. We tried very hard to find a replacement, but on such short notice, it was impossible." A murmur of disappointment spread through the crowd. People shook their heads. Some looked over at the beautiful grand piano sitting empty in the corner of the room. It seemed sad somehow, lonely. "We will continue with the evening's program," the host said, trying to sound cheerful. "But I do apologize for the missing music. I know how much we were all looking forward to it." She stepped away from the microphone. The crowd returned to their conversations, but there was a heaviness in the air now. Something was missing. Everyone could feel it. Stood near the back of the room holding an empty tray. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were sweating. She looked at the piano. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the floor. And then she heard a voice. "Excuse me." Turned. The security guard was standing a few feet away. He was wearing his usual uniform, but he had put on a tie for the special occasion. His eyes met hers, and in that moment she knew what he was about to do. "Please," she whispered, "do not." But it was too late. The old man walked toward the host, who was standing near the stage, watched in horror as he spoke to her quietly. The host looked confused at first, then surprised, then intrigued. She looked across the room, searching for something, searching for someone. Her eyes found. "Excuse me," the host said into the microphone. "I have just been told something quite extraordinary." The room grew quiet. All eyes turned toward the stage. "Apparently, we may have a pianist here tonight after all." Felt the blood drain from her face. This could not be happening. This was a nightmare. "I am told that one of our staff members, a woman who has worked at this hotel for 8 years, is actually a classically trained pianist. And I am told she is very, very good." 300 heads turned, looking around the room, trying to figure out who the host was talking about. Wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The host smiled and extended her hand toward the back of the room. "Would please come forward." Every eye in the room found her. Every face turned in her direction. Stood frozen, clutching her empty tray like a shield. She could not move. She could not breathe. She could not think. The room was silent, waiting. Looked at the security guard. He nodded gently, his eyes full of faith. She looked at the piano. It sat there under the lights, waiting for her, just like it had been waiting for 8 years. She thought about her mother. Her beautiful, brave mother who had believed in her when no one else did. Her mother who had sacrificed everything so could have a chance. Her mother who had told her, again and again, that her music was a gift meant to be shared with the world. What would her mother want her to do? Already knew the answer. Slowly she set down her tray. Her hands were shaking, her legs felt weak, but she started walking, one step, then another, then another. The crowd parted for her like water. She could feel their eyes on her. She could hear their whispers. She did not look at them. She kept her eyes fixed on the piano. The walk felt like it took forever, but finally she was there. She stood in front of the instrument, looking down at the keys. They gleamed under the lights, waiting for her touch. Pulled out the bench and sat down. The leather was cool, just like it always was. She placed her feet on the pedals. She rested her fingers on the keys. The room was completely silent. 300 people held their breath. Closed her eyes. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The little girl in Portugal who had fallen in love with music. The young woman who had given up her dreams to save her mother. The waitress who had spent 12 years being invisible. The woman who had finally found the courage to play again. All of those women were her. All of their stories lived inside her. And now it was time to let them out. Took a deep breath. And she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated into the air, soft at first, gentle, like a whisper, like a secret being told for the very first time. Then the music grew. It swelled and soared. It filled every corner of the room. It wrapped around every person like a warm embrace. Played like she had never played before. She played with everything she had, every loss, every sacrifice, every broken dream, every moment of hope. She poured it all into the music, letting it flow through her fingers and into the keys. And somewhere, somehow, she knew her mother was listening. The music filled the ballroom like nothing anyone had ever heard before. It started soft and delicate, like raindrops falling on a quiet pond. Then it grew stronger, more powerful, more alive. The notes danced and swirled through the air, touching every person in the room. Played with her eyes closed. She was not in the ballroom anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in her tiny apartment in Portugal, playing for her mother who sat in the corner with tears of joy streaming down her face. She was back at the conservatory, performing for her teachers who nodded with approval. She was back in time, reuniting with the girl she used to be. The guests sat frozen in their seats. Champagne glasses hung in midair, forgotten. Conversations died on lips. For those few minutes, Nothing else existed except the woman at the piano and the incredible music pouring from her soul. Some people started to cry. They did not even know why. The music just reached inside them and touched something deep. Something they had forgotten was there. A businessman in the front row wiped his eyes with his napkin. A woman in a red dress pressed her hand against her heart. Even the waiters and waitresses standing along the walls had stopped moving, completely hypnotized by what they were hearing. Played the final passage of the Chopin Ballade. Her fingers flew across the keys with passion and precision. The music built and built, climbing higher and higher until it reached its breathtaking climax. Then, with one final, powerful chord, it was over. Silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The last notes hung in the air like stars slowly fading at dawn. Then someone stood up, then another, then another. Within seconds, all 300 guests were on their feet. The applause was thunderous. It echoed off the walls and shook the chandeliers. People cheered. People shouted. People wiped tears from their cheeks while clapping as hard as they could. Opened her eyes. She looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed by what she saw. All these wealthy, powerful, important people were standing and clapping for her. For her. The invisible waitress who had spent 8 years carrying their plates and refilling their glasses. She did not know what to do. She did not know how to react. So she just sat there, hands trembling in her lap, tears rolling down her face. The host rushed to the microphone, her own eyes glistening. "That was absolutely extraordinary," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I have been to hundreds of concerts in my life, and I have never heard anything quite like that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your gift with us tonight." The applause continued. It went on for what felt like forever. Finally stood up and gave a small, awkward bow. She was not used to this. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be appreciated, to matter. As she stepped away from the piano, people reached out to touch her arm, to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they were. Complete strangers looked at her with admiration and respect. For the first time in years, did not feel invisible. Then she saw him. Standing near the back of the crowd was the man from table 12, the one who had humiliated her, the one who had called her just a waitress and said she would never amount to anything. He was looking at her differently now. The arrogance was gone from his face. In its place was something that looked almost like shame. Their eyes met across the room. For a long moment, neither of them looked away. Then the man did something unexpected. He nodded slowly, respectfully, and brought his hands together in applause. It was not much, just a small gesture, but understood what it meant. It was an apology, an acknowledgement that he had been wrong about her. Nodded back. She did not feel anger toward him anymore. In a strange way, she almost felt grateful. His cruel words that night had been the spark that lit the fire. They had pushed her back to the piano. They had reminded her of who she really was. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Person after person came to speak with. They wanted to know her story. They wanted to know where she had learned to play. They wanted to know why she had stopped. She answered their questions as best as she could, still feeling like she was living in a dream. Near the end of the night, a woman in an elegant black dress approached her. She had silver hair and intelligent eyes, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. "My name is Doctor," the woman said. "I am the director of the City Symphony Orchestra. I also run a small record label that specializes in classical music." She paused and smiled. "What you did tonight was remarkable. I have been in this industry for 30 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I have been moved like that." Did not know what to say. She just stood there speechless. "I would like to talk to you about your future," Doctor continued. "I think you have something very special, something the world needs to hear. Would you be open to meeting with me next week?" Felt like she might faint. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like her. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not in real life. But it was real, all of it. "Yes," whispered, I would like that very much." That meeting changed everything. Within 6 months, had recorded her first album. It was called Second Chances, and it featured all the pieces she had played during her late-night sessions at the restaurant. The album received wonderful reviews. Critics praised her emotional depth and technical brilliance. They called her a hidden treasure and a late-blooming genius. Within a year, was performing in concert halls across the country. She played for thousands of people who came to hear her story as much as her music. She became living proof that it is never too late to follow your dreams, that your past does not have to define your future, that the gifts inside you never really disappear, no matter how long you bury them. Never forgot where she came from. She kept her old waitress apron framed on the wall of her dressing room. Every time she looked at it before a performance, she remembered the woman she used to be, the invisible woman who had given up on herself, the woman who had believed the cruel words of strangers. She also stayed in touch with the security guard from the restaurant. He came to every one of her local concerts and sat in the front row with tears in his eyes. He had given her the push she needed when she was too scared to push herself. She would never forget that. At the age of 44, finally became the pianist she was always meant to be. Not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. Every hardship she had faced, every sacrifice she had made, every year she had spent in silence had given her music a depth and emotion that most musicians never achieve. Her mother had been right all along, did have a gift, and that gift was meant to be shared with the world. Sometimes, late at night after a big concert, would sit alone at a piano in an empty hall. She would close her eyes and play softly, just for herself, and in those quiet moments, she could feel her mother's presence beside her. She could hear her voice whispering the same words she had said so many years ago. "Never stop playing, my love. Your music is your soul, and your soul is beautiful." Never stopped playing again. And she never let herself be invisible ever again.